For years, she had been the ICU's punching bag, the quiet nurse assigned the worst shifts, overlooked by doctors, and quietly mocked by colleagues who never bothered to learn her name. Everything changed the day a squad of United States Marines stormed the ward, bypassed the hospital director entirely, and snapped a crisp, unwavering salute directly to her. At Seattle's Mercy General Hospital, the Level 1 Trauma Intensive Care Unit was a war zone of its own. It was a place of frantic egos, split-second decisions, and an unspoken but ironclad hierarchy. At the very top stood the attending trauma surgeons. Below them were the charge nurses, fiercely protective of their authority. And at the very bottom, almost invisible against the sterile white walls, was Mara Kane. Mara was in her mid-30s, though the heavy shadows beneath her eyes and the gray strands threading through her tight, practical bun made her look older. She wore oversized, faded blue scrubs that swallowed her frame, concealing a body that was lean, taut, and marked by old wounds. To everyone else on the floor, she was simply the grunt, the nurse you handed the bedpans to, the one assigned the delirious and combative patients, the one who took every holiday shift no one else wanted. She never complained, never gossiped in the break room, and rarely spoke above a whisper. Her direct supervisor was Sophie Lang, a young charge nurse with perfectly styled hair, an aggressively loud stethoscope, and a master's degree in healthcare administration she never let anyone forget. Sophie thrived on the drama of the ICU, treating the ward like her personal stage. "Mara," Sophie's voice cut through the rhythmic beeping one dreary morning. She didn't look up from her clipboard. "Bed 4 needs a full linen change. The patient blew out his IV again. There's blood everywhere. When you're done mopping that up, restock the crash carts in the East Wing before Dr. Crane does his rounds." "Understood," Mara replied softly, her voice stripped of any edge. She didn't point out that she was already managing 3 high-acuity patients, while Sophie sipped an iced latte at the central desk. She simply turned and walked toward bed 4. If anyone had truly looked at Mara Kane, they might have noticed the small anomalies. When a patient's heart monitor flatlined and the code blue alarm screamed, Mara never flinched. Her own heart rate never spiked. While younger nurses panicked and fumbled for medications, she moved with chilling mechanical precision, drawing epinephrine, securing airways, delivering compressions in a perfectly measured, brutal rhythm. But no one noticed. They only saw a quiet woman who kept her head down. The disrespect extended beyond the nursing staff. Dr. Everett Crane, head of trauma, regularly spoke over her. Once, during a chaotic shift, Mara had quietly suggested that a patient's plunging blood pressure wasn't from internal bleeding, but from a rare reaction to a specific antibiotic combination. "Nurse Kane," Dr. Crane had sneered loudly enough for the entire floor to hear, "when I want a pharmacist's opinion, I'll call the pharmacy. Until then, just hang the bags I tell you to hang." Mara had simply nodded and stepped back into the shadows. 2 hours later, when the patient nearly went into anaphylactic shock, Dr. Crane frantically ordered the exact treatment Mara had already prepared and left on the counter. Sophie quickly handed him the prepped medications and received a glowing compliment for her quick thinking. Mara watched from the doorway, her face an unreadable mask, before returning to empty a catheter bag. She preferred the invisibility. Being noticed meant answering questions, and Mara Kane had spent years trying to bury a past that still lived beneath her skin. A jagged, starburst-shaped scar marked her left shoulder, the unmistakable signature of shrapnel. In her small, sparsely decorated apartment across town, locked inside a fireproof safe, lay a purple heart, a silver star, and a carefully folded flag. She was content to let Sophie Lang play the hero of Mercy General. Mara had already seen enough real heroes die to know the title was nothing but a curse. The quiet routine of her hidden life shattered on a freezing night. The ICU was running on a skeleton crew. Sophie was dozing in the break room under the pretense of catching up on paperwork, leaving Mara to monitor the floor alongside a terrified first-year resident, Dr. Rowan Hale. Suddenly, the red trauma phone at the central desk screamed, not the usual ring, but the sharp, piercing tone reserved for incoming mass casualty or catastrophic trauma. Mara lifted the receiver. "ICU, Kane? We're coming up hot," The ER attending's voice crackled, raw with panic. Motorcycle versus semi-truck on the interstate. Patient is a 22-year-old male, active duty military. Massive blunt force trauma, bilateral femur fractures, suspected crushed pelvis, flail chest. We've already pushed 6 units of O-negative downstairs and he's still bleeding out. ETA 2 minutes. Have the massive transfusion protocol ready or he's dead before sunrise. Copy, Mara said. Her voice did not shake. She hung up and slammed her hand onto the emergency alarm, flooding the ward with harsh fluorescent light. What is it? Dr. Hale stammered, dropping his pen. Level 1 trauma? Pelvic crush? Flail chest? Hemorrhagic shock, Mara stated, her entire demeanor shifting in an instant. The slumped, invisible nurse vanished, her shoulders squared. I need the Belmont Rapid Infuser primed now. Open 2 central line kits. Page Dr. Crane and tell him to get out of bed. We need an immediate X-lap. Dr. Hale froze, overwhelmed by the sudden authority radiating from the usually quiet nurse. I should wake Sophie. Forget Sophie, Mara barked, the sheer volume and command in her voice making the resident physically jump. It was the voice of a woman who had shouted over the roar of Black Hawk helicopters and incoming mortar fire. Prime the infuser, doctor, now! The double doors burst open. Paramedics sprinted in, pushing a gurney slick with blood. On it lay a young man barely recognizable, his chest violently shuddering, collapsing inward with every desperate breath. Pressure's tanking, 60/40 and dropping, a paramedic shouted as they transferred him to bed 1. Mara descended on the patient like a hawk, while Dr. Hale stood paralyzed at the foot of the bed. She grabbed heavy trauma shears and cut away the shredded clothing. As the bloody fabric fell away, a distinct tattoo appeared on the patient's right bicep. An eagle, globe, and anchor, the United States Marine Corps. Dog tags hung from a chain slick with crimson. Mara's eyes flicked to the tags. Harlan, Jace J, USMC. Something inside her snapped tight. The sterile walls of the Seattle hospital faded. The smell of antiseptic was suddenly overpowered by the phantom scent of cordite and burning diesel. He's coding, the monitor shrieked, the line flattening. No pulse. Starting compressions, Dr. Hale panicked, rushing forward. No, Mara physically shoved the doctor out of the way. He has a flail chest. Compressions now will drive his shattered ribs straight through his heart. Then what do we do? Dr. Hale screamed, losing his nerve. We decompress, Mara said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. She didn't wait for permission. Grabbing a scalpel and a large-bore chest tube, she stepped to the Marine. Nurse Kane, you can't! That's a surgical procedure, Dr. Hale gasped. You'll lose your license! If I don't, he loses his life, Mara fired back. Without hesitation, she made a swift, precise incision between the Marine's ribs, shoved her gloved fingers into the pleural space, and felt the rush of trapped air and blood. She guided the tube into place. Blood poured into the drainage canister as the tension pneumothorax released. Pushing 1 milligram of epi, she ordered herself, jamming the syringe into the IV line. Clear. She seized the defibrillator paddles, slapped them onto his bloody chest, and delivered the shock. The young Marine arched off the bed. The monitor beeped once, then twice. A weak but steady rhythm returned. Just as the heart rate stabilized, Dr. Everett Crane sprinted in, still buttoning his lab coat, with Sophie Lang close behind, looking disheveled and annoyed. Dr. Crane took one look at the blood-soaked bay, the perfectly placed chest tube, and the stabilized monitor. He glanced at Dr. Hale, pale and trembling, then at Mara, quietly wiping blood from her arms. Excellent work, Dr. Hale, Dr. Crane breathed, stepping up to the bed. A bilateral thoracostomy under this kind of pressure? That's attending-level work. You just saved this boy's life. Dr. Hale opened his mouth to speak, but caught Mara's eye. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Don't. Thank you, Dr. Crane, the resident stammered, staring at his clean hands. Sophie, Dr. Crane barked, take over the charting. I want this patient prepped for the OR immediately. Nurse Kane, get out of the way and clean up this mess. You're tracking blood into the hallway. Yes, doctor, Mara murmured, her shoulders slumping again as she reached for a mop. In the days that followed, Corporal Jace Harlan clung to life. The hospital buzzed with gossip about the young, handsome Marine in Bedouin. When word spread that he was a highly decorated infantryman recently returned from a brutal deployment, the administration saw a public relations opportunity. The hospital director, Mr. Langford, descended on the ICU with photographers in tow. He learned that the Marines' commanding officers, along with several high-ranking officials from the nearby base, were coming to present Corporal Harlan with a commendation earned overseas right there in his hospital bed. Sophie Lang went into overdrive. She rearranged the schedule so she would be assigned as the Marine's primary nurse for the visit. She styled her hair, applied extra makeup, and practically shoved Mara into utility closets whenever administrators walked by. "Mara, I need you on bedpan duty in the West Wing all afternoon," Sophie ordered on the morning of the visit, aggressively straightening her name tag. "The media will be here. We need the face of the ICU to look professional. And honestly, you look exhausted. Just stay out of sight." "Sure, Sophie," Mara said quietly, picking up a stack of fresh towels. At the appointed hour, the heavy double doors of the ICU swung open. The frantic chatter at the nurses' station died instantly. Through the doors walked a detail of United States Marines in perfectly pressed dress blues. Leading them was a grizzled, imposing colonel with a chest full of ribbons, followed by 2 captains and a squad of heavily decorated enlisted men. Their polished shoes clicked in perfect unison against the linoleum. Mr. Langford practically tripped over himself, rushing forward. A wide, camera-ready smile plastered across his face. Sophie stood right behind him, posing perfectly. "Colonel, welcome to Mercy General," Mr. Langford beamed, extending a hand. "I'm the hospital director. We have taken the absolute best care of Corporal Harlan. Let me introduce you to our heroic head nurse, Sophie, who has been tirelessly by his side." But the colonel did not take the director's hand. He did not even look at Sophie. His cold, steel-gray eyes swept past the cameras, past the confused doctors, past every shiny, important person in the room until they locked onto the far corner of the ward. There, standing beside a biohazard bin holding a bag of soiled laundry, was Mara Kane. The colonel stopped dead, the blood drained from his face, replaced instantly by an expression of absolute, unadulterated shock. "My God," he whispered. He ignored the hospital director completely. He shoved past a stunned Dr. Crane. The entire squad of Marines followed, marching straight past the VIP delegation, their eyes fixed on the tired, invisible nurse holding the trash bag. Mara froze. The heavy bag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. The colonel stopped exactly 2 feet in front of her. He snapped his heels together with a violent crack that echoed through the dead-silent ICU. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand in a razor-sharp salute. Behind him, the 2 captains and the entire squad of Marines did exactly the same. "Staff Sergeant Kane, ma'am," the colonel barked, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of grief and total reverence. "It is an honor to finally find you." The entire hospital ward stopped breathing. The rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitors faded into a hollow, distant echo. Mr. Langford stood frozen, his manicured hand still extended toward a man who had completely ignored his existence. Sophie's jaw had gone slack. Her meticulously planned photo opportunity was disintegrating before her eyes. Mara did not move. She didn't drop her gaze. Slowly, the exhausted mask of the invisible nurse fractured. The submissive posture she had worn for years evaporated. She straightened her spine, planting her feet shoulder-width apart. She did not return the salute. She was in civilian scrubs. But she offered a sharp, singular nod. "At ease, Colonel Shaw," Mara said. Her voice, usually a meek whisper designed to avoid Sophie's wrath, was suddenly resonant, carrying the unmistakable commanding timbre of a veteran non-commissioned officer. The Marines snapped their arms down in perfect unison, moving to rigid parade rest. Colonel Garrett Shaw, a man whose chest bore the ribbons of 3 different war zones, let out a breath that sounded like a suppressed sob. "They told us you were gone, ma'am," he said, voice raw with emotion. "After the ambush in the Arghandab Valley, after the medevac chopper took fire, command said you didn't make it off the surgical table in Kandahar. We've spent several years thinking the best combat medic in the United States Armed Forces was buried in Arlington." "I survived, sir," Mara replied calmly, "but the woman who came back wasn't fit for the uniform anymore. I took my medical discharge and went off the grid. I needed the quiet." "Quiet?" Mr. Langford finally choked out, his face turning a blotchy, panicked red. He stepped forward, desperately trying to reclaim control. "Colonel Shaw, I believe there is a massive misunderstanding here. This is Mara. She's just a basic floor nurse. She cleans the bedpans. I assure you, you have the wrong woman." Colonel Shaw turned his head. The look he gave the hospital director was so lethally cold that Mr. Langford physically recoiled. "Mr. Langford, is it?" Shaw growled, stepping into the director's personal space. "Let me educate you on exactly who is standing in your hospital. You are looking at Staff Sergeant Mara Kane, lead medic of the 75th Ranger Regiment's forward surgical team. During a catastrophic ambush, Her unit was pinned down by heavy mortar fire. When our designated surgeon was killed by a sniper, Staff Sergeant Kane took command. She performed field surgeries in the dirt under active machine gun fire. When an RPG hit our position, she threw her own body over 2 wounded Marines, taking a chest full of shrapnel to keep them alive. She single-handedly kept 14 men breathing until extraction arrived. She was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action and the Purple Heart. She is a legend in the Special Operations medical community. Shaw turned his gaze to Sophie, who suddenly looked very small in her designer scrubs. "And you have her emptying trash cans," he stated, disgust dripping from every word. She never said," Sophie stammered, stepping back until her spine hit the charting counter. "She doesn't have the certifications. She's just a grunt. She has more practical trauma experience in her left pinky finger than this entire floor combined," Shaw fired back. He turned to Mara. "I knew it was you the moment I read Corporal Harlan's surgical report this morning." Dr. Everett Crane, who had been watching with growing indignation, finally pushed his way forward. His ego, bruised by being sidelined in his own domain, demanded attention. "Colonel, with all due respect to the military, this is a civilian hospital," Dr. Crane said loudly, crossing his arms. "Corporal Harlan's report has nothing to do with Nurse Kane. She is not a doctor. She is not authorized to perform invasive procedures. The life-saving bilateral thoracostomy that saved your Marine was performed by Dr. Rowan Hale." He gestured grandly to the first-year resident. Nurse Kane merely handed him the tools. Colonel Shaw did not look at Dr. Crane. He looked at Dr. Hale. The young resident was paper white, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at Dr. Crane's arrogant face, then at Sophie's terrified one, and finally his eyes found Mara. She gave him a gentle, reassuring look, silently giving him permission to maintain the lie. She didn't need the glory. She never had. But Dr. Rowan Hale had reached his breaking point. The crushing guilt of taking credit for a masterclass in trauma surgery, combined with the awe-inspiring presence of the Marines, shattered his silence. "No," Dr. Hale whispered. "What was that, Dr. Hale?" Dr. Crane snapped. "I said no," Adam said louder, stepping forward, his hand shaking. "I didn't do it. I panicked. Corporal Harlan was coding. His flail chest was compressing his heart, and I completely froze. I was going to do compressions. I was going to kill him." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd of administrators and journalists who had slipped in behind the military detail. "Dr. Hale, watch your words," Mr. Langford warned, eyes darting to the flashing cameras. "I'm telling the truth," Rowan yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Mara. "She pushed me out of the way. She diagnosed the tension pneumothorax in a fraction of a second. She grabbed the scalpel, made the incision blind, and drove the chest tube in with one hand while ordering me to push epi. She didn't just hand me the tools. She orchestrated the entire code. She saved his life. Dr. Crane, she knew more about trauma surgery in those critical minutes than you've taught me all year." Dr. Crane's face turned a violent shade of magenta. He whirled on Mara, his professional facade crumbling into furious embarrassment. "You performed an unauthorized surgical procedure," he shrieked, spit flying. "Do you realize the liability? You could have killed him. You broke every protocol in the hospital charter. Langford, I want her terminated immediately. I want her nursing license revoked. Have security escort her off the premises right now." "Are you out of your mind?" Colonel Shaw roared, his voice hitting a decibel that made the windows vibrate. The 2 Marine captains stepped forward, hands resting ominously on their duty belts. Shaw moved directly in front of Mara, shielding her. "You pompous, arrogant fool. You are going to stand there and threaten to fire the woman who saved the life of a United States Marine because she bypassed your precious paperwork to stop a young man from bleeding out in your pristine little ward?" "She broke the law," Sophie piped up desperately. "She's insubordinate. She constantly disobeys my orders to manage the floor." "Your orders?" Mara finally spoke, stepping around the colonel. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her cold, unwavering authority silenced the room instantly. She looked down at Sophie, pinning the charge nurse with a gaze forged in literal fire. "My insubordination, Sophie, is the only reason half the patients on this ward survive your shifts. While you were taking selfies at the nurse's station and falsifying charting times, I was catching the medication errors you authorized. 2 weeks ago, I swapped out a lethal dose of potassium you calculated incorrectly for bed 7. Last month, I intercepted a contraindicated blood thinner Dr. Crane prescribed without checking the patient's coagulopathy panel." Dr. Crane blanched, stepping back. "You have no proof of that." "I kept copies of every original unedited chart," Mara replied smoothly, tapping the side of her head. I spent my years in the military learning how to document incompetent officers to protect my enlisted men. Did you really think I wouldn't do the same here? Mr. Langford looked like he was going to pass out. The liability Mara was describing wasn't just grounds for termination, it was grounds for a massive hospital-ending malpractice lawsuit. Staff Sergeant, Colonel Shaw said gently, placing a massive hand on her shoulder, you don't belong in this miserable place. The base hospital at Joint Base Lewis McChord is looking for a civilian director of emergency trauma training. We need someone who can teach these new kids how to keep their heads when the world explodes. Name your salary. We will fast-track your administrative credentials by tomorrow morning. Mara looked around the ICU. She looked at the polished floor she had mopped, the crash cart she had meticulously restocked, and the patients lying in their beds, completely dependent on the people in this room. Then she looked at Dr. Rowan Hale, the young resident who had just sacrificed his own standing to tell the truth. I appreciate the offer, Colonel, Mara said, a faint, genuine smile finally breaking through her stoic expression. But I think my current battlefield is right here. There are a lot of good people in this hospital who need proper leadership, and a few who need to be forcefully retired. She turned her gaze to Mr. Langford, who flinched. Director Langford, she said, stepping forward. She wasn't asking, she was dictating terms. You are going to promote Dr. Rowan Hale to Chief Trauma Resident. He has the integrity this hospital desperately lacks. Secondly, Sophie Lang is relieved of her duties as charge nurse, effective immediately. If she wants to stay, she can take my old shifts. Let's see how she handles the bedpans. Sophie let out a strangled sob, but Mr. Langford quickly nodded, too terrified of the PR nightmare standing in front of him to argue. And Dr. Crane, Mara continued, turning to the head of trauma, you are going to step down as head of the ICU. You will submit to a full peer review audit of your prescribing history. If you refuse, I will hand my copied charts over to the state medical board before the sun sets. You can't do this, Dr. Crane whispered, completely defeated. She just did, Colonel Shaw intervened, flashing a terrifyingly triumphant grin. He turned to the hospital director. Mr. Langford, the United States military brings millions of dollars in federal healthcare contracts to this hospital system every year. If Staff Sergeant Kane isn't given the title of Chief Clinical Director of this ICU by close of business today, I will personally ensure every single one of those contracts is severed. Do we have an understanding? Yes, sir, Mr. Langford squeaked, wiping sweat from his brow. Complete understanding. Colonel Shaw turned back to Mara. The fierce military commander softened, replaced by a man looking at his savior. He snapped another crisp salute. It's good to have you back on the line, Staff Sergeant, he said quietly. Mara returned the salute this time, her hand perfectly angled, a silent acknowledgement of her past, her present, and the power she had finally reclaimed. It's good to be back, sir, she replied as the Marines marched out of the hospital, leaving a path of stunned silence in their wake. Mara Kane didn't pick up the mop. She walked calmly to the central desk, picked up the charge nurse's clipboard, and began to repair the ward. The invisible nurse was gone forever. The staff sergeant had taken command. Did this story of quiet endurance and reclaimed dignity leave you speechless? Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest histories. If you love this powerful twist of fate and the triumph of a true veteran over arrogance and dismissal, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs a reminder never to judge a book by its cover, and subscribe for more stories of hidden strength and hard-won respect.